A man who savagely raped a little boy is released from prison and he's going home. Except that home happens to be your neighborhood. If a sex offender came to live in your neighborhood, would you want to know? Should you have the right to know? Well, right now you don't, unless you live in Louisiana or the state of Washington. A few months ago, this convicted sex offender came back home to Seattle after serving time for molesting a 9-year-old girl. Under Washington law, the police put posters up all over the neighborhood. And when the neighbors saw the posters, they were outraged. They didn't want the child molester back in their neighborhood. 2,000 people came out to protest. But it didn't stop there. Someone set fire to the sex offender's home. The neighbors said it wasn't them.
You know, I'm not for arson, but, you know, for stuff like this, I applaud you, whoever you are.
Is all of this going too far? Civil rights activists say yes, because sex offenders also have rights. The right to privacy without their name being plastered all over the neighborhood, and the right to get on with their lives once they have paid their debt to society. So, what do you think? Talking today about whether or not sex offenders should have to tell you if they're moving into your neighborhood. And in the state of Louisiana, they have the most aggressive law that's been passed and enforced. And this is what it requires. Sex offenders released on probation or parole have to inform neighbors with their name, address, and criminal code in the urban area. They must mail postcards to anywhere within a 3-block area. They got to mail cards. They have to take an ad in the paper. They have to let the neighbors know that they are sex offenders and they are coming to live in their neighborhood. And I want to introduce you to a man, to Wilfred Bouton. He was convicted of sexually molesting 2 9-year-old girls. He joined us from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, with his 18-year-old daughter, Leslie. You are one of those people who were directly affected by this Louisiana law. You had to mail out 250 postcards to people in the neighborhood and let them know that you were coming to move in, right?
Right.
I want to know, Wilfred, how has this made your life? Are you angry about this? You think it was the right thing?
Yes, I am very angry. In fact, it wasn't sexual molestation, it was sexual battery, meaning I touched him in the wrong place. Now, a lot of people don't know the story, but it was, they came over to the house to sleep. They were playing outside, and the blankets they had on, they were all wet. And I went in the room not even 5 minutes to change their blanket. The little girls stayed there from Friday night until Sunday night. And this was supposed to happen on a Friday night. Okay, now the little girls went back home and they started telling their parents, I don't know what, or whatever happened, I still don't know. But it's something about the little girl's parents that had a grudge about
you know, Wilfred, you have to excuse me, I've got to interrupt you. We are not here to discuss your innocence or your guilt. You have been found guilty by a court of law, and as a result of that, you were considered a sex offender, and because of that, you had to let everyone in your neighborhood know that you were coming to move in. And what we really want to know is why you're angry about this law and why you think it's unfair that you had to do this.
Right. First thing, when you're getting out of prison, whatever, you don't have no money, you don't have a place to live, you're trying to help yourself, and you can't get on your feet. And then when you have to pass, they give you this law to do everything, you got to come up with a lump of money just to do what they tell you to do. And
send out these postcards and put this ad in the paper. And how much did this cost you, Wilfred?
Altogether, around $300-something, I guess, altogether. That's not cost, moving expenses and everything else.
Now, this is the ad you put in the paper. We're looking at it right now. It says, under Act 962 of the 1992 legislature, I am required to inform you that I have been convicted of sexual battery, and that my address is, and it gives your address, and this is my name, and you had to do this.
Right.
All right. Don't you think it's fair that people know that if you're a convicted sex offender that you're living in the neighborhood?
Not really, not if you're trying to start out a new life, or, you know, trying to get back to where you started from.
So you think if you're gonna get a new start in life, you deserve every break you can get?
Right.
Okay, I want you to meet Carol. Now, Carol, you're familiar with this particular case. You were very actively involved in getting this piece of legislature passed in the state of Louisiana. And you firmly believe, because of your own personal experience with sex offenders, that we have the right to know if they're moving into our neighborhood, correct?
Right. I definitely believe that if you do the crime, you do the time. And most sex offenders will tell you, or prisoners in prisons, that the sex offender is one of the lowest of the low in the criminal society. And as a matter of fact, I understand that here they keep them separate, whereas in Louisiana they do not. I personally got involved with this because in 1982, January, before this law, 10 years later, was put into effect in Louisiana, that my daughter was murdered by a necrophile.
Now, a necrophile, we should explain, and if you have children watching, I suggest that you take them out of the room while I try, in a sensitive way, to explain what a necrophiliac is. It is someone who has sex with a dead body.
Correct. Right.
So that is the person who murdered your daughter.
Well, it was even worse because it was a child who grew up with my children. He was the same age as my son, and he was, his family lived right down the street from us, and his sister was the same age as my daughter. So they grew up in the same neighborhood and played and was very much a part of each other's lives for like 9 years. So on the night that this happened, he snuck out of his house, hid on the side of my house, and he watched his sister and my daughter, who was to be home at 9 o'clock at night, come home. He watched them wave each other off because they had to do that when it was dark. And then when his sister went in, he approached my daughter. And
How old was your daughter?
My daughter was 12, and he was 16. He dragged her around the side of the house, and she struggled, and with a stick, he strangled her. And she was able to get the stick away from her neck quite a few times. And she pleaded and begged for her life, and he just killed her anyway. And then he put her, when the boys were younger, we had built them a clubhouse. And they had outgrown that at 16, so the girls were using it as a dollhouse. And he put her in the dollhouse after. If it had not been a necrophile, they fulfill their fantasy by having something with sex with something dead. And had it not been for the fact that we had let our 2 Doberman puppies out at 9 o'clock, he would have carried out his fantasy, which was to have had sex or defile the body. It just so happens that he was not able to fulfill that fantasy. Instead, it scared him off because he thought he was going to get caught. And he went back home, took a bubble bath, called some friends, and when the search began for my daughter, he actually came back to my house and sought my son and stayed side by side with my son while we searched for her. He then planned to, after helping us look for her, and he had scratches and so forth on his face that we were not aware of the significance at the time, planned to spend the night at my house. The ironic thing, this happened on a Sunday at 9 o'clock p.m. And on Monday at 9 o'clock a.m. the following day, he was going to be arrested because his house had been wiretapped by the obscene division of phone calls in the police department. And the father and 2 daughters who he was calling and stating that he would make threatening calls such as, how would you like to be killed, had sex, raped, cut up and mailed around the country, or put in a plastic bag and put in a freezer. These types of threatening, and he was doing this for about a year and a half to girls between the ages of 10 and 14.
Let me ask you before we go to the break, Carol, because this has become a very important part of your life. When you hear Wilfred say that although he is a sex offender, he has come back home to this neighborhood, and how can he start over if he has to tell everybody in the neighborhood that he's a sex offender? It's not fair to him. How do you respond?
I think that's just too damn bad, because there are children out there. Our most precious gift these days are our children. And when we can't protect them, and obviously we have not been able to, I don't think we need to give the criminal breaks. I think we need to bust their butts.
Back in just a moment.